And it's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's start in the UK, where a man in a red dress defaces a war memorial as crowds look on. No one tries to stop him. No one says a word. This is what civilizational decline looks like. Now, talking about civilizational decline, California is a perfect example, blessed with every natural advantage but riddled with crime and poverty. And yet the governor thinks he can be president, and he's spending good money producing content like this, attacking Donald Trump.
Wake up, America. Wake up to what Donald Trump is doing. Here he is once again trying to rig the system. He doesn't believe in the rules. We can't stand back and watch this democracy disappear district by district. We have got to meet fire with fire.
The chutzpah there is extraordinary. It's all about projection with these Democrats. Now let's hear from a CNN host, Fareed Zakaria, on Bill Maher's program, and he gives a very important reality check for Gavin and his ilk.
This is a huge Democratic Party problem. If you look at Democratic cities, they are terribly run. They have incredibly high taxes. It is impossible to build, so the cost of housing... Let me finish. I'll give you a chance. Cost of housing is crazy in places like New York and Chicago. If you look at Democratic states, you go look at New York versus Florida, okay? Roughly the same population. The budget of New York State is twice that of Florida. What do they have? Streets paved with gold? I live in New York. I pay the highest taxes in New York. You get nothing for it. And I think that is the image people have of the Democratic Party. Lots of taxes, lots of regulation, but nothing gets done.
Now let's hear from Kamala Harris. She enjoys cocktails and incoherent rants. Here she goes with the latter.
I think what they're doing is they're cheating. They're cheating. They want to change the current system to make it bend toward the outcome they want. And so, if you believe the public reporting, they get a call that says, hey, redo your lines, even though the fallout is going to include exactly what you said, which is, taking the franchise, the vote, away from specific communities. And in the case of Texas, Latino and Black voters. Yeah.
Just about everything she said there was a lie, half lie, or just confused Kamala babble. And it got worse as Kamala praised the pitiful Texas legislators who fled the state and abandoned their duty.
And I have to say that, those Texan legislators, good for them.
And being an incoherent simpleton runs in the family. Here is Kamala's stepdaughter whining about climate anxiety. She feels disgust, folks, so much disgust.
I feel disgust at what's going on in the world around genocides, the loss of rights, the loss of health care, the just general fear that everyone has surrounding affordability, their lives, their livelihood, like everything. It feels so big. I think everything with the environment is really getting to me. And it is I experience a lot of climate anxiety, like a lot of us do. It's not funny.
Wrong. It is funny. It's hilarious, in fact. Let's hear now from the thoroughly discredited James Comey. You remember the former FBI director who played not an insignificant role in the Russian collusion hoax, who improperly leaked information to activist journalists. The Biden DOJ declined to charge him for that. He may not be so lucky now that he's under criminal investigation. And don't forget that bizarre behaviour where he posted a threat or a death wish against the president Remember that lunacy? He claims he didn't know what it all meant. Well, now Comey has really lost the plot, posting a lengthy video about Taylor Swift and, of course, Donald Trump.
And Donald Trump is still president and still humiliating America on a national stage, standing next to Vladimir Putin. It's like a dream, a bad dream you can't wake up from. But I don't want to talk about that bad dream this week. I want to talk about a truly inspirational public figure named Taylor Swift. Of course, I watched her podcast interview with the Kelsey brothers. Of course, I watched the whole thing, although on YouTube, Patrice and I got kicked off for the last 15 minutes and finished it on her phone. But I watched it. You see, Taylor Swift and I go way back. I went to my first concert of hers 15 years ago. I've been to a second, and I have helped financially support the attendance of a lot of family members at others. I'm in a family's Swiftie group chat.
What the what? What is he on about? It's the former director of the FBI. I don't know if he's angling for some sort of not guilty by reason of insanity plea, should there be any charges. That mad rant went on for another 5 minutes, and his love of Taylor Swift was just a means to bash Donald Trump and Republicans. I'm telling you, this dude needs professional help.
And don't get me wrong, we have our jerks, millions of them, you may have noticed. In particular, there's a stunning coarseness and ugliness in the Republican Party today. It's upsetting, but it's also a minority of America. On the whole, we aren't like that, and we don't like that. I think that's a big part of the reason so few Americans support Donald Trump when they have to see him and that up close, and why Republicans are so worried about what's coming for them next year, which is what makes me think about Taylor Swift. She's made clear that she sees Donald Trump for what he is, and last year she urged Americans not to make the serious mistake of electing him. Of course, we're now living with the consequences of that mistake, but while our elderly makeup-covered president is posting about whether Taylor Swift is still hot and declaring that he can't stand her, what's she doing? Living her best life.
Yep, he's genuinely lost the plot, or perhaps angling for that insanity plea. Joining me now is Newsweek's senior editor-at-large and Article 3 Project Senior Counsel, Josh Hammer. Josh, the former FBI director, together with the former CIA director, John Brennan, are reportedly under criminal investigation for their part in the Russian collusion hoax, including allegedly making false statements to Congress. How worried should he be? He's saying Republicans are worried about what's coming next year. Should he be worried?
You know, Rita, first of all, it's pretty late here on the East Coast of the United States, and I was planning on just going to sleep after our conversation. But after this video that I have just seen, I am utterly terrified of the possibility that I'm going to be awake all night due to just serial recurring nightmares. So I'm going to have to go in bed and find some comedy on Netflix to just unwind and just try to forget the horror that I just saw there. But, you know, James Comey, going on and on there about how Taylor Swift has seen President Trump up close. Well, now I've also seen Jim Comey up close for the first time in God knows how long. Dude looks like he's aged 25 years over the past 7 or 8 years. First of all, I don't know what he's doing in his personal life. I don't know what's going on there. But I mean, talk about just, like, what was that? Like literally, what was that? I mean, is he literally trying out to become like the backup drummer for the new like Taylor Swift traveling band? Is he trying to be like the third wheel in the Travis Kelce Taylor Swift relationship? I mean, like, what is his end game here exactly there? But if I were Jim Comey, if I were offering unsolicited legal advice to Jim Comey, which I would never do because I would personally prefer to see him locked up behind bars. But if hypothetically I were offering unsolicited legal advice to Jim Comey, I would say stop watching your stupid Taylor Swift crap on the internet and probably go find a good criminal defense lawyer, dude, because you actually need it, because you have probably lied to Congress within the 5-year statute of limitations there. I think that Jim Comey, Clapper, Hillary Clinton, I think all three of them are actually in serious jeopardy here when it comes to the 5-year statute of limitations there. I think the Pam Bondi task force, Rita, is very much on the case there. And if I were Jim Comey, I would be very, very worried. He should stop with this stupid crap. I don't know what the heck he's trying to do here with the Taylor Swift thing, but frankly, it's creepy. It's really, really, really weird there. I would just focus on trying to avoid prison time, dude.
I think there need to be charges, Josh. We've spoken about this in the past. It's all well and good to have some level of transparency and have an understanding of how this Russian collusion hoax came about, who was involved, who was complicit. But without some accountability, without some consequences, what's going to be the disincentive for the Democrats not to do this again the next time around?
Well, you're totally right. There will be no disincentive. Now, it's tragically late as it is. I mean, let's just be clear here. When we're talking about Russiagate, when we're talking about Brennan, Clapper, and Comey cooking the books to launder the Steele dossier, Fusion GPS, Hillary Clinton campaign through the very tail end of the Obama intelligence community. We're talking here about 2016, 2017. I mean, we're talking here about crimes that were committed 8.5, almost 9 years ago, depending on the specific conduct. So the fact that we're even having this conversation now, I think, is frustrating in and of itself. This is a conversation that very much should have happened, frankly, during the first Trump term. I mean, we shouldn't have been talking about the Mueller probe and trying to investigate whether or not Donald Trump was actually a Manchurian candidate, Putin, Kremlin asset. We should have been talking about trying to put people like Jim Comey and John Brennan and Jim Clapper in jail. So the fact that we're having this conversation delayed is extremely frustrating, in and of itself. The problem, Rita, as you and I have discussed, is that a lot of the, shall we say, flashier, sexier crimes have statutes of limitations there. Now, again, as we discussed in the past there, I am of the opinion there that if I were recommending to Pam Bondi's DOJ task force, I think that it is well within the bounds of reason and, dare I say, even prudence to try to get, shall we say, a little creative with some of these statute of limitations tolling, the same way that Alvin Bragg was very creative to Donald Trump when it came to the whole Stormy Daniels, Michael Cohen fraudulent bookkeeping statute there. I mean, the statute of limitations for those quote unquote crimes should have expired like 5 or 6 years or something there. And they found some way to stick that work in the most Stalinist trial in American history there. So if there's a will, there's a way. I don't necessarily love that I'm saying this, by the way. I'm a lawyer. I revere the rule of law, the Constitution there. But Rita, the point is, I think you and I are of like mind on this. Unless you teach these people a lesson, unless until you really sock them across the jaw and they pay some sort of serious price for this, they're going to escalate and escalate and escalate until we're all in some proverbial or literal gulag. And I know that I personally don't want to end up like that.
No, well said. Now to the Russia-Ukraine war. We saw the show of strength from the US, including that stealth bomber flyover over Vladimir Putin's head. But overnight, we've had the Ukrainian leader, Zelensky, speak out about these negotiations. He had this to say.
The constitution of Ukraine makes it impossible to give up territory or trade land. Since the territorial issue is so important, it should be discussed only by the leaders of Ukraine and Russia at the trilateral Ukraine, United States, Russia. So far, Russia gives no sign that trilateral will happen.
Josh, he referenced the Ukrainian constitution there and called for further economic sanctions against Russia. How do you see this latest development?
Okay, so first of all, the optics of this meeting in Anchorage, Alaska on Friday were really incredible, Rita, weren't they? I mean, the B-2 bomber flying overhead. I mean, as they were walking down the red carpet, Donald Trump taking Vladimir Putin's hand and like physically pulling in for like the world's ultimate power handshake. I mean, the optics were just can't miss, unmistakable stuff. The problem here in this conflict, and Zelensky saying there what he's been saying for the past 3.5 years, which is that Ukraine is not ready or willing to give up an inch of territory. Meanwhile, on the other hand, you have Vladimir Putin, who simply thinks that Ukraine literally does not and should not exist as a sovereign, independent entity. It's very difficult, frankly, to see at this time what is an actual Venn diagram overlap sweet spot, a zone of possible agreement between these two parties there. So look, I mean, Donald Trump at times sounded somewhat frustrated after the meeting, at times sounded somewhat optimistic there. The details, I think, remain a little bit to be determined. But both of these men are going to have to budge there. I mean, Putin is going to have to recognize that Ukraine has existed since the downfall of communism and is going to continue to exist as an independent country. Zelensky is going to have to concede the reality on the ground as far as where the military troops are and so forth, that Ukraine is not going to have the same borders after this war that it had prior to the February 2022 incursion from from the Russian army. On the other hand, Ukraine's going to have to accept as well that they're not going to join NATO and the European Union. So there's going to have to be a lot of give and take here on both sides. The rough outlines of a deal, Rita, I think are pretty clear. They've been fairly clear now for about 2 years, which is really probably 3 years, which is the most frustrating part of all this there. But again, these two guys just aren't willing to budge there. But you know what? Here's what I know. I know that if there's one guy who can actually get this through across the finish line, it's the guy who got the peace deal between Cambodia and Thailand, between Congo and Rwanda, India and Pakistan, Armenia and Azerbaijan, Israel and Iran. My goodness gracious, how many peace deals has this guy gotten just in the past 6-7 years, or past 6-7 months of this administration there? So we'll see if he's got one more trick up his card, Rita, but I definitely would not discount the possibility.
Now, the Democrats are turning on each other. Mayor Eric Adams has hit out at the man likely to replace him as mayor, Democrat and communist Zoran Mamdani, who, despite being a Muslim, Josh, wants to decriminalise prostitution. Well, Mayor Adams was calling him out on that. He's wondering what Quran Mamdani is reading.
I'm a man of God, just as Mamdani says he's a Muslim. I don't know where in his Quran does it state it's okay for a woman to be on the street selling their body. I don't know what Quran he's reading. It's not in my Bible. And so if that's his belief, it is dangerous for our city.
Josh, I've got to say, it's controversial, obviously, for Mayor Adams to say what he said, but I'm so glad he is calling out this unholy alliance that exists between and Mamdani is really a good representative of it, this unholy alliance between the far left and Islamists, you could call them, who've got nothing in common other than their hate for the West and their hate of conservatives and Republicans.
Yeah, it's the old red-green alliance, and Zoran Mamdani is the singular encapsulation of this. By the way, so is this nut job running for mayor in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Omar Fateh as well. Exact same thing there. But, you know, Mamdani, you know, Eric Adams is right. I mean, Mamdani is not a, shall we say, he's not a Hamas-style Islamist. I mean, this is not someone who actually believes in the universal binding nature of Sharia law. Rather, what Mamdani does is he takes kind of the identity politics aspect of his Islamic background and then takes it and kind of transmogrifies it, launders it through the prism of progressive politics. That's how you get him going all in on the globalize, the intifada stuff when it comes to Israel, when it comes to his anti-Semitism there, when it comes to his whole noxious DEI woke worldview. But I mean, this is obviously not someone who is a particularly pious or religious Muslim there. But you know, Rita, I never fail to laugh, you know, when these individuals come along. I think back more often than I probably should about a woman named Linda Sarsour. The world has probably forgotten that she existed.
Her.
But she was the leader of the Women's March back in 2017. And there were these old tweets of hers kind of lauding Sharia law and what it said about credit cards and interest payments. It was apparently a very favorable liberal policy there. I mean, has anyone asked Linda Sarsour, the leader of the Women's March, what Sharia law says about, I don't know, women and about like women's rights and all that there? So I mean, this whole red-green alliance, Rita, I mean, as you properly say, it's all about destroying Jews, Christians, the West, capitalism, literally all of Western civilization. But I mean, it's a rather odd alliance, isn't it?
It is, and you know how it's going to end because those two groups really agree on nothing, and one of them is not particularly tolerant of anything that is not part of their belief system. Now, from one Democrat city to another, LA is a mess. Downtown LA is derelict, depressing place. It's getting some attention for just the huge crime, Josh, the homelessness, businesses boarded up. And we see this across the US in some of these big, former, glorious cities that are just shadows of their former self. What's the solution to this decay? They do have one thing in common. They are all ruled by Democrats and long term. But if the people keep voting for politicians who enable this, what is the solution? Is there a way to recover these cities and restore them to their former glory?
Look, I mean, not to sound like an ultra partisan, but you're totally right. I mean, virtually every city in America that has, gone down the toilet over the past 3, 4, 5 decades on end, whether it's Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Memphis, Tennessee, St. Louis, Baltimore, Detroit, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I mean, there's just so many examples there. And, when is the last time there's been a Republican mayor in literally any of the cities that I just named? I actually don't know what the answer is, but I suspect it's been a very, very long time there. So, at some point, it's very difficult to help people, Rita, who don't want to help themselves. Like I have the same thought similarly as well when I look at the current situation in Europe, when I look at the horrible situation in the UK when it comes to these roving gangs of Pakistani Muslims that are doing all sorts of horrible things to little English school children there. I think, how can I help them? Then I also say, you can't help people who don't want to help themselves, whether it comes to importing, mass folks from Syria and Afghanistan who want to assimilate there, whether it comes to electing Democrats here. So it's a very difficult thing. But I do think a little bit about this quote from a great 20th century social critic and newspaper columnist by the name of H.L. Mencken. He was a famous early 20th century columnist here in the United States. And H.L. Mencken had this one famous quote, Rita, where he said that democracy is the theory that the common man knows what he wants and he deserves to get it good and hard. So I look at a city like Los Angeles, I look at a city like Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, and I say, you know what? This is H.L. Mencken's quote at work. I'm just happy for one, though, that I live in the free state of Florida.
Before you go, Josh, I just want to get your input about the NFL forcing its teams to participate in more activism, more pointless activism. The teams are being told they have to put up these messages on their end zones, things like end racism, stop hate. There's about a half a dozen social justice messages that they can choose from. But I noted that Harmeet Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, had her own suggestion. She wants this to be on the end zone. No one is above the law. I can get bored with that sort of messaging, Josh.
Well, Harmeet Dillon, by the way, is absolutely fantastic. And the American people are blessed to have her in her current position as the head of the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. I've been following Harmeet, known Harmeet for a long time there. So, she is one of many, many somewhat under the radar, amazing appointees currently serving the American people and serving it at a very high level. Unfortunately, when it comes to the NFL, Roger Goodell, the commissioner, has been down the woke rabbit hole for a very, very long time now. Now, Rita, a lot of these pro leagues here, the NFL, the NBA, they really doubled and tripled down on the woke crap after the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis back in 2020. But it's been literally over 5 years. I mean, it's been literally over 5 years. Donald Trump has been brought back like a phoenix, from his political death. He is now president of the United States a second time there. He is waging a war on DEI through executive orders, through judicial decisions, through an all of the above strategy there. And, when are these remaining cultural institutions going to get it? But ultimately, Rita, in a situation like this, the onus does fall on folks like me, frankly. I mean, for someone like myself who is conservative, who nonetheless is a big sports fan there, I mean, I hate to say it, but I guess the onus really does kind of fall on us to really just turn the channel and, and not watch this and try to send the message, because that message actually does work. I mean, think about Anheuser-Busch Bud Light after the Dylan Mulvaney fiasco 2.5 years ago. Think about Target 2 years ago after they had the so-called quote unquote tuck-friendly clothing for children, the transgender stuff. Their stock went down the toilet there. So the American consumers are actually very capable of speaking out when companies disrespect their consumer base there. And unfortunately, again, as a sports fan, it's kind of painful to say, but I think that the NFL is probably the next in line for such treatment.
Josh Hammer, thank you so much for your time today.